We're now in week 2, and we're going to start to dive in. Like I said, this class is going to be very hands-on. It's also going to be very new to a lot of you. So I'm assuming that a lot of you have some understanding of how a Windows operating system works. So we're going to start by opening up Windows Explorer, File Explorer here. It's going to come up with a quick access page right here if you're using Windows 10, which you should be. I don't know that you'd be able to put your Linux subsystem on if not. You have your desktop environment, which is the environment here where I'm scrolling around with the cursor. It's your desktop. You have your downloads directory where programs and files that get downloaded are stored. When you write a document in Word or Excel, or you have an Access database or something to that effect, or any other kind of text file, you usually want to store that under Documents. As you can see by my desktop, I definitely don't always follow my own advice there. You'll also see a Pictures folder, and I have an Installers folder set up. So it's found that folders that I use most frequently, and it's put them under Frequent. Yours might look a little different. On this PC, you're also going to have your own music folder and your own videos folder. If we click on the local hard disk, which is almost always going to be your C drive, it doesn't have to be, but it almost always will, we can see that there's a folder called Users. I might as well say this right now. In Windows, we call different directories, we call them folders. In Linux, we call these directories, but they're basically the same thing. So let's go in on this computer, and we have the users folder, and we have Glenn, which is the user that I created, and I'm the person on this machine. When I click on Glenn, I get all these other folders, including Pictures and My Documents, and I'm going to have this Installers folder, which I created. You'll see Favorites. That's where your Windows Edge favorites get stored. You have your desktop, which I mentioned. You can see some of these files in here. If I were to click on desktop, you'd see the exact same files here. You'll notice that I can go back a level or forward a level. So when we look at it this way, the directory users is considered the parent of the directory Glenn. So you can't get to the Glenn directory without going through its parent directory. So let's say I want to go into my Installers directory now. So Glenn is now the parent, and Installers is now the child directory. If I highlight very carefully here, I can see C, Users, Glenn, Installers, and I can copy that right there by right-clicking on it. So now let me open a new window here. This is Text Notepad++. There's also programs called TextPad, which are really good. You can use Notepad for this class as well if you wanted to take some brief notes. So I'm just going to paste that in there right there so you can see the directory. Okay. Now I'm going to right-click here. I can actually right-click here as well. Whoops, excuse me. I can right-click here as well and go to File Explorer. And I'm opening up a brand new window. So now, with my directory in the clipboard, I'm able to go ahead and paste that in, and it'll put me back in the directory I was in. That's how we do things in Windows. If we want to copy a file, I'm going to stay on my desktop right here. I'm going to right click again. I'm going to go into New. I'm going to create a new folder here. It comes up highlighted. I'm going to call this Temp. And on here, I'm going to open it. I'm going to go to New. I'm going to create a new, let's say I'm going to create a new bitmap image. That's a graphic. We'll call this File 1. And I'm not going to do anything with it right now. I'm just going to create it. I'm going to go ahead and create a text document. and I'm going to call that one new text document. So inside a graphical user environment such as Windows, we're able to copy different items to different folders very easily. Let me create another new folder here. I'll right click and I'll make a new folder. We'll call this one second. Now I can take this here, I can drag this file right in and it's going to go away. It's actually dropping it into the second directory. I can also drag this back into temp. You can see how it says move to temp right there. So I can actually move it back to its parent. I can do this by having various windows open as well. So if I wanted to go back to the installers directory here, I can come back like this, go to the desktop here, go to temp here, and I can see that these two folders are the same now. So I can actually take these items here. If I single click and hold the button, I can highlight everything. I can then drag it and drop it. Now it's in this folder second and it's not in under temp here. If I wanted to have two items in the same place, I could select them, I could right click, I can copy, and then I can right click and paste again. So now I have two copies of the same files. This is how we basically get around. There's lots of other ways to do this in Windows. This should be review, I'm hoping, but I wanted to kind of go through how we move and how we copy files around in the environment. We can do the same thing in a Linux environment. However, most people using Windows are not concerned with using the GUI. And that's because Mac OS X has a very nice GUI, so people aren't going to use the terminal there. That is kind of one and the same on a Mac. If you're using Linux, the X Windows sessions, which are the graphical user environments, they're good, but they're not as good as Windows or Mac OS X environments. So going from a graphical user environment to a lot of people in Linux is unnecessary, and people like to stay at the command line. So in Linux, we're going to focus more at the command line. In Windows, we're really going to stick to cutting and pasting. Now, there is a way to do this with PowerShell, which is a subshell. There's a way to do this also with MS-DOS. Previously when I've taught this class, I have taught MS-DOS. At this point in this class, I think it's better to focus more on the Linux type things. I also wanted to mention here that when I drag this information from one place to the other, if it's already there, it'll say replace. If I want to create a new item, I might copy here and paste it right in the same place. It's going to create a copy of itself. So if I want to drag this here, it's going to move it because this directory and this directory here are both on the C drive. They're both on the same drive. If this was being copied to a network drive that wasn't local to the laptop or was not local to the desktop, when I say local, I mean that the drive is not installed on the actual machine you're using, but it's a network drive. So it's a drive that you've mapped from someplace else. Doing this drag and drop will actually copy the file and not move it. It's only when you're copying it from one local location to another that it moves it. If you're copying it from if you're dragging it from a remote location to another remote location, or from your local location to a remote location, the files are going to copy and not move. And that's important to understand there. So I did want to go over a few things with file names. So in Windows, we have these dots, with the period .bmp or .txt here. Those are known as file extensions. When you're using a file extension, it can be used to associate a type of program with a specific application. In other words, a program that's .bmp, let's take a look at the properties for it. So I will right click on it, and at the bottom it's always properties. I bring that up, and since it's type of file .bmp or bitmap image, it opens with Paint. So I can change this and have it open with something else. Let's say I'm not actually going to do it because I really don't want it to, but I can pick a different app to open a BMP with. I can have it open in my browser. I can have it open in a media player. Like I said, I'm not going to, but I could. And I could make that change right there. So file extensions are a really big deal. Like with a .txt file, I believe I have that open, that associated with Notepad right now. So if I double click that, it opens with Notepad. I say help about, and it's going to be Microsoft Windows Notepad. See, about Notepad right there. So that's how associations work on a Windows machine. In Linux, we use file extensions, but they really don't do anything with an association. When we do an extension in Linux, it's really for the user to understand what it is. I do .sh a lot in Linux, and that means shell script. A lot of people do .bash, which is a specific type of shell script. Maybe you save your file in Linux as .txt. That's so you know that it's a text file, but Linux doesn't really care. So in Windows, these extensions are important. Another thing that's important to understand is the directory tree structure. Like we discussed in week 1, we have a tree structure here. This is the root. This base of the local drive is the root. So, or the network drive. This is the root of C right here, because I can't go back any further on this drive. If I want to go in one level, that's one folder in. I could go into logs, that's another layer in. And when I want to look at that written out, the nomenclature that's used on a Windows machine is we first specify the drive letter, followed by a colon, followed by a backslash. So the backslash, a backslash by itself that looks like this, that looks like that. Whoops, hold on, I messed that up. That looks like that is going to put me at the root of the C drive. Any folder after that is going to be designated by a slash. If I want to go into this Intel directory and I look at it here, I have /Intel. If I want to go into logs, I could type /logs. You'll notice the capitalization. I am not going to capitalize it here. So you'll notice that where I'm typing it, it's not capitalized. In the directory itself, it is. In Windows, that doesn't matter at all. In Linux, it does. So capitalization is very, very important in Linux, or knowing that it's case sensitive, where Windows, it is not. I also want to discuss that there's some naming conventions and some characters that we can't use when naming a file in Windows. For example, I'm going to create a new file here. We'll make it a text file. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to use some characters that I can't use, like the colon right there. It won't even let me try and type it here. So these characters have special purposes, and we're going to go through that, and they can't be used. So take a couple minutes and focus on some keyboard shortcut keys. Sometimes you can get your commands executed and out there a lot quicker using the keyboard than you can with the mouse. And there's a lot of times, as a Windows power user, you want to have these shortcut keys available at your beck and call. So you want to know about these. If I hit the Windows key, and first of all, let's clarify what the Windows key is. So on the lower left side of the keyboard, you'll see a button that looks very similar to this Windows button in the lower left of your screen where I'm hovering right now. So if you press that Windows button and the letter R, for example, it's going to bring up the Run menu. Let's say you want to run Notepad. So type in Notepad or whatever you want to run and hit enter, and it'll open it up. If you want to open the File Explorer, which we've been working with throughout this lesson, I can hit Windows and the letter E, and it'll bring up the File Explorer. If I want to switch between my open programs like Notepad++, Firefox, Word, etc., I can hit Alt and the Tab key, and I can zip between the programs that I want to have focus on. So let's say I want to focus on Notepad++, I can do that, but I really do want to stay focused on Word. If I want to maximize my active window, I can hit the Windows key and arrow up. Now it's maximized. If I hit arrow down, it will restore it. If I hit arrow down again, it will minimize it. Like so. So good tricks there with the Windows keys. If I hit Shift, Control, and Escape, it will open up the Task Manager, which we'll be discussing later on. And if we hit the Windows key and the letter F, we will get the Feedback Hub if you wanted to provide feedback to Microsoft. So those are your basic Windows shortcut keys. Thank you very much. Now let's take a look at some Linux, and we'll work with some directories and some listings there. This may seem very foreign to some of you. It may be second hat to others. So you saw what I did there. I clicked on Start. I had recently had us pin Ubuntu to the Start menu. So that should be somewhere in with these tiles here. It would also be under Recently Added from the previous week. So you should be at this point now where you have your prompt, which looks like this. You'll have something similar if you're using your MacBook. We discussed how to get into the terminal with the MacBook, so the commands that we go through today will be almost exactly the same between the two computers. So I'm going to just, on the homework, I'm going to ask for some output, screen output from your PC or from your Mac. And I want to see that you've done the assignments and that you understand the assignments. So again, from this prompt, everything will be the same regardless of whether you're using Ubuntu on the PC or you're using the terminal on your MacBook. First thing we're going to do is we're going to wipe the slate clean, and we're going to put everything into a folder for ourselves here. We're going to take mkdir, which is make directory, and we're going to create a directory. I would like you to name it CIS170 and hit enter. Okay, that's good. Now notice that I capitalized CIS170. Now I want to demonstrate that case sensitivity is important here. So to change directory, it's the cd command. So we're going to cd CIS170, but you'll notice that it's all in lowercase. This isn't okay. So if I hit enter, it doesn't recognize it, where if I was in MS-DOS on a Windows machine and I typed those exact same commands, it would work. So Linux is case sensitive. There is one exception that exists, as far as I can tell, only with this Ubuntu subshell. And I'll go into that a little bit later once we're a little bit more comfortable. So I'm going to do a cd CIS170. And now it's capitalized property. You can tell that my prompt is changed right here. You can see that it has this tilde here, and it's got a different directory that I'm in here. So at this point, I think we should create some files. So there's a couple ways in Linux that we can create files. Let's use the touch command, which will just create a zero-length blank file, very similar to what we were doing in Windows when we were right-clicking and picking the different file names with the different extensions. Those were just creating zero-length files as well. So we'll do the touch command. We'll type touch. We'll call it file1, and we'll hit enter. Okay. For the second file, that created a zero-length file, nothing in it. It just updated the timestamp and created the file. If I type echo, which will display information, we'll type echo file2, and then we'll do a greater than sign, and we'll type file2. Now this is another way to create a file, and this will make a lot more sense in later chapters once we get into it. I'm just starting to show this stuff on the screen, but don't worry if you don't understand this yet. We will understand it later. So now you've got a couple files there, but how do you know? You can't see them. You can hit enter a couple times. That doesn't do anything. So the next command that we're going to learn is ls, which stands for list directory. So if we type ls, we can now see file 1 and file 2, but we don't know anything at all about these files. So let's list the directory and get a little bit more information with it. So if we type ls and we do -l, -l is what's referred to as a parameter. So we'll put that -l on there, and it'll give us a little bit more insight as to what we need to look at. This directory listing is very important, and this will all make sense as we go, but I want you to understand some of it right now. If we look here, we see there's a small little dash in this very first position here on file 1 and on file 2. This initial dash means that we have created a file. The next 3 positions, that's RW and this dash here, those are security parameter positions for the owner of the file. In this case, I own the file. Glenn owns the file. Glenn is the user who owns the file. This Glenn right here is the group. So when we create a user, that user has his or her own group, and the user has his or her own ID. So I have a Glenn user and a Glenn group. So RW and this dash here are associated with Glenn the user. The following RW and dash represent Glenn the group. The last RW dash represent everybody else, anyone else out there. So this will make a lot more sense as we go on, but for right now, understand that these positions here have to do with file security. All right, so now we have 2 files, but we really don't have anywhere to copy them. So I want to do something similar to what we did in Windows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another directory, mkdir, and I'm going to create a second directory. Okay, so now let's do that. Now I want to show you just really quickly, if I do an ls-l, we can see that the permissions are actually wide open for this second folder here. And I called it a folder, it's actually a directory. And you can see it has the D in the first position. So that's how we know it's a directory. So the UMask permissions, which we're also going to go into later, is really wide open on this Ubuntu Linux here. However, we want to learn the different commands. And we're going to learn the move command twice, because in Linux, the move command is also the rename command. For now, let's work on moving file 1 into the second directory. So we could type mv, which is the move command. We'll type file 1. We want to move it into the second folder. So we do have something here called autocomplete too. Like I can tell by looking at the files or directories in this location that there's only one that starts with the letter or the number 2. These all start with F. So if I were to hit F and then tab, it's going to give me as much as it can, but it's going to want me to pick. However, if I hit 2 and hit tab, it knows already that it's a directory, so it automatically puts the trailing slash on. So let's say I want to move file 1 from its current location to file 1 under second. So I go ahead and do that. Now if I want to list the directories again, I only have one file there. If I look under second, I can do an ls on 2nd, and I can see that file 1 is under the second folder. So that's how we move things around. If we wanted to copy from that folder, we do have the parent-child folder situation going here in the directory structure. So if we type in pwd, which stands for present working directory, it tells you where you are. You'll notice that the slashes go in the exact opposite direction in Linux, although I believe in Windows they will actually allow you to do this now too, but it's considered wrong. So in Linux, you have the /, so the first slash indicates root. Then you have home, which is where most of the user home directories are. You have Glen, which is my base home directory, and CIS 170, which we just created here. So just like in Windows, Glen is the parent directory for CIS 170. CIS 170 is the child directory to Glen. And we can kind of see that a little bit differently here on a Linux environment. If I do an ls-l, okay, oops, I meant to do an ls-l a will show hidden files. Any file in Linux is hidden if it starts with a period. That is the criteria. If you want a file not to be readily seen, put a period in front of it and it'll hide it in Linux, unless you put the A parameter after the list. So now I do this, and I can see that I have the period here, which is the current directory, and I have the 2 periods here, which is my parent directory. So remember, we're in CIS 170 is the directory we're in now. The parent for CIS 170 is going to be Glen. So let's go in through the parent directory. So cd ... will take me back. And now I just see this silly tilde again. If I type pwd, you can see I'm definitely in my home directory. But what is this silly tilde? Let's take a look. So let's go to the tmp directory, which is completely different, as you can see. There is nothing that references my path here whatsoever. So if I were to type cd and then the tilde, I get the tilde as my prompt again. But if I type pwd, you can see I'm back under home Glen. Okay, and this is going to be very, very similar doing this on your Macs. The directories and the paths will be a little bit different. For one thing, the home directory on your Mac is going to be /users with a capital U, and you're going to have to know that it's just going to be a little different. However, the same rules apply. pwd is a command that works. The tilde is still going to be your home directory. You're just going to have a different home directory. So you Mac users, make note of that. Take a look. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about when you go ahead and try these commands for yourself. The other command that I wanted to look at is going to be the copy command. So let's go back into your CIS 170 directory. So if you don't know how to get there or you got lost, let's type cd tilde slash CIS 170, and that'll make sure that you're in the right path. Now from there, let's copy the file 1 from the second directory to your current directory. And if you remember, we looked above the single period as the current working directory. So let's try to copy the file back to where it is. So if we do a CP on second, we want to copy, I can just hit tab because I know it's the only file there, but you could type it out or do what you have to do. Now I could type second right here and it'll put it right back where, I'm sorry, I could type file 1 right here and it would put it right back where it was, and we'd have 2 copies. Or I can simply type the period to say put it back in the current directory. So let's do that. And if I do an ls-l, you can see that I have 2 files there once again. So you'll notice also right here, this is 0. Remember, we touched this, so it's just an empty file. This file here has 6 bytes in it. So I believe that file says file 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's where that comes from. Actually, it looks like 5. It must have the carriage return. That's the other byte. So keep that in mind, and that's where this size got put in here. We're going to go into permissions and stuff a little bit later. Don't just go through this assignment here and say, oh yeah, I got it. Go ahead and play around a little bit, create some empty files, learn the move command, learn how to move around with them a little bit. With this class, I am going to give you the outline. I do also expect you to be able to look things up using Google and using the internet for yourselves. As a computer professional, I surf the web for answers every day, all the time, and I know my boss does the same thing. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody. I know this is a lot, and I'm going to start off really slow, but make sure you know how to copy files around. Everyone should be able to do this on their own machines. If there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you. One other thing I wanted to mention before we go here, I wanted to show you from week 1 that the root listing, so right here I type cd / that puts me in the root of this subshell here. If I type ls-l now, and you see the etc directory, the home directory, you see that /root is the home for the root user. You see srv, sys, you see user and var, mount, media, you see the libs, the binaries, the boot folders, /dev. So you see all this, and this is going to coincide with that diagram that we went over on week 1. And I wanted you to be able to see it for yourself right here to see how similar of an environment we're working in. This isn't relevant to this class. I wanted to let this be shown though in case you wanted to go off and explore on your own. So when I said that Linux is case sensitive, I meant it. It really is. But there's some strangeness to that because this is a Windows subshell. If I type /mnt and I do an ls, I see this C down here. So if I cd to C, that's the C drive on your local machine. So if I do an ls here, these are actually your Windows directories that we went through previously. So you Linux people who are using the MacBook, you're not going to see this, but I thought it was interesting. And these different directories under /mount/c are not case sensitive. Everything else is. I find that completely fascinating, but don't get in the habit of thinking that's the way Linux is. I just wanted to show you that this is something interesting to the subshell, and it's somewhat new to me as well, and I find it intriguing, which is why I wanted to teach the class with this subshell. so you can really see how you can integrate Linux and Windows together. Thank you.